Michigan's Children proudly presents Speaking for Kids, the podcast where we explore crucial conversations impacting the lives of all Michigan children, youth, and families, especially the most vulnerable. Join us each month as we explore public policies and issues in the best interest of our kids and families. We'll bring you lawmakers and policymakers, advocates fighting for change, and the people most affected by those decisions. With our host, Matt Gillard, President and CEO of Michigan's Children, we'll invite you to become engaged too and show you how to take action on what matters most to you. Episodes are recorded live and shared virtually on YouTube and the audio hosting sites Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Speaking for Kids, a podcast for Michigan's Children. I'm Matt Gillard, the President and CEO of Michigan's Children, and your host for this. Today, we're happy to have a return guest for us on Speaking for Kids, Jeff Capizzano, who's the president of the Policy Equity Group. About a year ago, we had Jeff and Dawn Bell, who at the time was at the Early Childhood Investment Corporation, on to talk about a plan that Jeff's group had been commissioned to put together as kind of an implementation guidelines for implementing universal pre-K here in Michigan. As many of you listeners know, a big piece of the governor's budget proposal for this year and for last year as well has been around this movement towards providing universal access to free preschool for all 4-year-olds in Michigan. And there's been, frankly, a lot of concern amongst folks throughout the early childhood system on the impact that may have on different aspects of the early childhood system, and namely childcare. So Jeff's group was commissioned to put together this implementation plan, hopefully a guiding principles document for us for things to consider as we move towards this implementation of universal pre-K. So now that report's out, Jeff, why don't you jump in? You can introduce yourself quickly and kind of give us kind of the highlights to start this conversation on what came out in this report that's been presented.
Sounds great, Matt. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Capizzano, president of the Policy Equity Group. We're an early childhood consultancy out of Washington, D.C., and had the privilege of working with the University of Michigan and Southern Imaginations on the implementation plan for pre-K for all. I think, as you guys know, last January, the governor put forth a pretty ambitious goal of providing universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds in the state, and so pretty heavy lift. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is really figure out, like, what does the research say about what high quality pre-K looks like? What do the stakeholders want? And so we ended up spending a year really working, looking at other states, looking at the research, and then spending a lot of time talking to stakeholders. So we did community listening sessions across the state. We opened a sort of a portal for comments. We got 4,000 people that commented on sort of what they wanted to see for pre-K for all. And we hope that as you listen to the recommendations that you hear, if you were a part of that process, that you hear sort of your input sort of into this. I think the roadmap really was designed to answer 3 questions related to implementation. The first one was really, how do you build capacity to meet this ambitious goal of serving so many children so quickly? The second was, how do you get families to enroll? How do you maybe work on making the pre-K program more accessible to families, making it work better for working families, and how do you get them sort of excited about enrollment? And then the third is, as you know, Matt, this is really about sort of 1 year of age, in the birth to 5 continuum. So the question is, how do you make this one initiative for this one age group work within sort of the system? And so those are the questions that we set forth to answer. We had all of this research, we had the input, and then we were guided by this amazing group of state stakeholders called the PreK for All Action Team. That Superintendent Rice was on it, Tim Bartik, like some really great thinkers at the state level that helped to guide sort of the recommendations. And so using all of that, sort of we came up with sort of what we think are like 4 core stories related to to what we think the state should be doing. I think the first one is really about making sure that there are 22,000 kids that are in private pay settings right now and community-based settings. And so we wanted to make sure that they had an opportunity to participate in pre-K for all, that they weren't going to be losing their 4-year-olds to other, to school-based programs. We want to be able to keep them where they are. And so, we have a set of recommendations related to how that would work. Another big thing is when you think about sort of the workforce, the key issue is compensation. And so, thinking about sort of ways in which to, adequately compensate the pre-K workforce, making sure that they are paid on par with K-12 teachers, and hoping that that will be a way in which we sort of develop the workforce. Also, thinking about kind of the integration of early childhood or the pre-K for all within the early childhood spectrum, thinking about, you're funding this, but, providing recommendations related to, infant and toddler supports related to sort of before and after school care and things like that, making sure that this isn't the only funding that's happening within the system, that you're funding sort of the entire system. And then with regard to sort of enrollment, really thinking about expanding, pre-K to 5 days a week, incentivizing that, making sure that working families, it makes sense for working families that they have to work as hard to sort of patch together childcare, making it pre-K for all universally eligible to make it easier sort of to get the classrooms filled and things like that. So those are kind of the highlights. Happy to dig into any of those that you want to talk more about. And sorry I talked too long.
No, that's perfect. No, I'm glad you jumped into kind of the 4 keys. We had one of your colleagues on a different program yesterday, and she kind of outlined those same kind of 4 themes. So is it safe to say that those 4 themes are what emerged from the stakeholders? I mean, I think it's amazing that you talked to over 4,000 stakeholders or connected with over 4,000 stakeholders in putting together this plan. And are those the themes that emerged from that level of conversation from folks throughout the state, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we tried to do in the actual report is we talked first about what we heard from stakeholders and then how we responded. And so, one of the things we heard very clearly from the childcare community is like, we are very scared that we are going to lose our 4-year-olds. And so we wanted to sort of make sure that we reflected that in the recommendations to be, okay, we want to make sure in this plan that, and a lot of the reason why these providers are so worried is that the current GSRP standards, particularly around the teacher credentials, are too high for them to be able to meet, right? And so the question is, how do you preserve sort of the quality that is ingrained in a lot of the GSRP credentials, but also provide a pathway for community-based providers to be a part of this? And so what we do in the plan is we see the GSRP standards currently as the destination, right? It's not the gateway that lets providers in or out. It actually provides like the goals that we want to meet. And so we let these providers in, we fund them, and then we give them a pretty long runway in order to try to meet those standards ultimately. So as like a 6-year runway for many of the standards. And so that's kind of, we heard loud and clear that that's what the community-based providers were worried about. And so, we responded with that accordingly. Similarly around making sure that this works for working families, the 5-day-a-week recommendation was really in response to families being like, GSRP is a, part day, part week, part year program. That's not really working for my full-time schedule. We need to work on that. So so we were trying to be as responsive as we could to all of the stakeholder feedback.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And like I said, all right, so a couple of things before maybe we get to it. So the plan's out there now. Where can people find it? I know there's an executive summary. Is there an easy place where if people wanted to look at this more closely, they could find it?
Yeah, it's on the MyLeap website, and you can Google pre-K for all Michigan, and that's the first thing that pops up on the Google search, or you can go to the MyLeap website to find it. I would encourage. So we try to make it as accessible as possible. We have a longer report that's pretty long and dense and really has all of the, here's what we heard, here's what we did, all of the methodology, and then we have an implementation brief that provides the highlights. So you can dig deep, or you can just get the highlights, and both are on the MyLeap website.
Great. All right. So now let's kind of dig into what this means, right? And so this is really where I think, from our standpoint as an advocacy organization and from people on the ground, either in the childcare field or parents of 4-year-olds or soon to be 4-year-olds, what does this all mean? So, I mean, we talked a lot about this on a different program yesterday on a Lunch and Learn, but implementation obviously is the key, right? That's what this is all about, right? So the governor sets a vision, sets a goal, says we should have access to free 4-year-old preschool for every 4-year-old in Michigan. Great. How that's implemented is really the nuts and bolts and what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, to oversimplify this, I mean, the idea is that your group working with all these stakeholders puts together this plan, and then the governor and legislature, collectively implement that plan through the appropriations process and through the legislative process. Obviously, it doesn't always work out that way, and isn't that as simple as I just stated it to be. That said, I mean, how do you feel? So this plan came out, obviously, the governor's budget proposal now. So for our next fiscal year, our fiscal year 25, which will start October 1 of next year, the governor's proposal is out in front of the legislature. The legislature, literally, as we speak, is currently working through that proposal and will send their own back to the governor. How do you feel about the way things are moving right now as far as from the governor's proposal and maybe some things we should be looking for as the legislature starts to dig into this as well?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, that's kind of one of the things that I wanted to talk about. I think this is really going to require kind of an all hands on deck from the advocates actually to sort of make this plan happen. I think, one of the things to your point is, in order for this to work, Pre-K for All to work, you can't cherry pick these recommendations, right? This is a comprehensive strategy to make this work. And so as we think about sort of our advocacy strategy going forward, we want to be thinking about all of the recommendations. I think, the governor's budget proposal is kind of a first step towards some of these. I think the things that are most encouraging that reflect the plan is the higher per child allocation, for example, moving forward, because we recommend that as a way to sort of get to compensation parity as a first step. Also, the differential for providing 5-day-a-week care. I think they're proposing something like a $10,000 for 4-day and then a $12,000 for 5-day. And so having sort of that incentive to provide 5-day-a-week care is important because it does cost more to do that. And so we are seeing some pretty good steps forward. I think we need to be thinking about like all of these different pieces. I think particularly around like continuing to increase the per child allocation and also well, I'll stop there, but I think there's a lot still to be done.
Yeah, and as I said, and now we move into the kind of the legislative part of this process, right? Where different political factors weigh in and different interests will certainly make their voices heard as well. And we saw some of that last year, which was concerning to a lot of folks as well, and some efforts made to really kind of shift the trajectory of our overall pre-K program. So no, I think you're absolutely right. And I couldn't agree more. I think it is an all hands on deck. I think there's certainly a clear role for advocates to play. And I think, fidelity to the plan or fidelity to the roadmap is going to be a key component of what we're talking about and what we're, advocating for in our conversations with legislators and continuing with the administration as well. Let's dig into one more component. I know that Franny talked a little bit about yesterday, but the idea of equity, right? And so, one of the concerns I think we have from Michigan's Children's standpoint, and I think some other advocates share as well, is that, even before last January when the governor announced this universal pre-K goal, we had been, doing a decent job in Michigan of providing access to 4-year-old pre-K for those at the lower end of the economic scale, and for those more challenged economically or socioeconomically. Now, as we shift towards universality, we lose some of that equity focus, right? And so, what is the plan? How did you address that in the plan, and how? Maybe talk a little bit about that, because that's I think a concern for advocates as well. Is that now we're shifting this as to more of a benefit, frankly, to middle and upper income families, and not just focused on where the greatest need is, maybe.
Yeah, I'm hoping we don't lose the focus on equity. I think, one of the things that, we talk about in the plan is that, yes, we want to remove the income eligibility gap, right? To sort of reduce the stigma and to make sure that we can get these classrooms fully enrolled, but you're still prioritizing the children who have the greatest needs first. And I think, what we learned through the process is that, the ISDs that are implementing this have already, even within sort of the fact that, you might be serving children below 300% of poverty, they still have a schedule for prioritizing different kids. And we don't necessarily, even when we sort of open it up to universal, we don't want them to lose that sort of priority mechanism. And so we want to continue to prioritize those. And in fact, that, when we started this process, the governor gave us like a set of guiding principles. And one of the guiding principles was we need to continue to serve the lowest income children first. And so, thinking about that, and also, thinking a little bit about, I'm in DC, we have universal pre-K in DC. And, thinking about how important it is to have sort of mixed income settings for children and sort of the benefits of that. And so I think, between the continuing to prioritize these low income children first, regardless of sort of the eligibility threshold, and then sort of the benefits around sort of having mixed income settings. I think I think we're continuing to move in the right direction. And as you know from the budget, Matt, I mean the increase in GSRP funding is only going to allow another 6,800 children in. And so the question is, if we go to universal, we're still not able to serve all kids. We need to continue to prioritize.
Yeah, and even that number is a little bit up in the air when we talk about 5-day and the increased allotment for a full week at 12. No, I understand that. All right, so give me a couple of maybe what keeps you up at night? What are you most concerned about maybe as something that could get lost, and that could be a big problem if it is not followed as this process moves along?
Workforce, like finding the teachers, compensating them adequately. I think, we heard a lot about that. It's like being able to find, teachers to be able to serve in these roles. And I think one of the things that, we worked on and, in the implementation plan is what we call the compensation first strategy. I think there's so many, programs that are like, okay, if you meet this credential, if you get a BA, then we will ultimately pay you more money, right? But we find from some research from the University of Virginia that it's exceptionally hard, given the current wages of early childhood educators, to stay in that educational system, to get that credential, to get that additional funding. And so we're really focused on this compensation first strategy. Like if you're a lead teacher of pre-K for all, you should be getting sort of parity with a K-12 teacher, and then with the understanding that you're going to ultimately get those credentials, because we want to keep those teachers in the workforce and getting the credential. So it's really, like, for me, this is an amazing way to improve the quality of early childhood settings sort of in Michigan. And but not doing it that way is a concern. So and just making sure that we can really get educators, stabilize them, keep them in our workforce, and move them along this educational trajectory towards the credentials of GSRP. It's going to be a heavy lift.
Yeah, and even to dig into that a little more, I mean, that's one of the big concerns from the providers, right? The traditional childcare providers as well, is losing their workforce to other GSRP providers, right? And that, and watching out for that is a potential pitfall, I know, is a real concern from a lot of the folks that we're hearing from as well. And not to, and I mean, the workforce has been an issue long before we ever even started talking about UPK, right? And the workforce is an issue in every state that, where in childcare across the country, there are workforce concerns, and compensation is right at the front of it. But I think, that viewing this as an opportunity to address that, I think is great, but we have to be really careful and really, I think, committed and focused on how we're utilizing this increased investment, frankly, in young children and in early education to strengthen the workforce across all of it. I think is really where the challenge is from our standpoint as well. So I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah, and I do think, the other thing is, like, it's just really difficult to focus just on one age of the birth to 5 continuum, right? And so, the other piece of this that is of concern is, okay, how are we going to be focusing on sort of infant and toddlers? And we know that, everything that we're experiencing with issues in PreK are multiplied numerous times for infant and toddler care. And so we need to be really thinking about how we're continuing to support sort of, the other parts of the system too. So.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, that's been part of the frustration, I think, from us and from some other advocates with the administration since this started, is at the same time we're seeing this focus on early childhood from our governor, which is a good thing, but we're seeing it narrowly focused for the most part on 4-year-olds, where in other states you're seeing a broader focus on early childhood, on the birth to 5 continuum, and on state resources and investments and prioritization around that continuum rather than just 4-year-olds. And so I think that's part of the challenge here in Michigan. But we're committed to seeing it through. And thankfully, because of the efforts of you and your group and the over 4,000 people that reached out and participated in this process, at least we have a roadmap to follow and a plan to guide us, and obviously a lot of work to do ahead of us. Any closing thoughts here as we close out that you want people to be aware of or to think about?
I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to talk. I think, again, this is going to require the advocacy of all of us to really implement this in a way that's going to be beneficial to childcare providers, to, those who are serving infants and toddlers. And so just hope everyone has a chance to read the plan, and, please reach out to me if there are any questions, and look forward to working with all of you on sort of getting it fully implemented.
Well, thanks again, Jeff. Thanks for all the work that you're doing, and thanks for agreeing to be a part of this. And thanks to everybody for listening. And you can find more information about this issue and follow this issue as it moves through the process and as all the twists and turns that come with it on our website at michiganschildren.org, and look for future editions of the Speaking for Kids podcast and other programming we do about these issues and other issues that are important to kids and families here in Michigan. Thanks, and have a good day.
You've been listening to Speaking for Kids, the podcast for Michigan's children with host Matt Gillard. Thanks for joining us. To explore these and other issues relevant to our state's children, youth, and families, and to build your advocacy muscle, go to our website at www.michiganschildren.org. You'll find links and news about past and future podcast topics under our Resource tab, and action alerts under the Take Action tab. Find and like us on Facebook and Twitter. Terry Bannis and Stephen Wallace produced this podcast. Contact them with your questions and ideas for other topics. Michigan's Children is a nonprofit advocacy organization, an independent voice working to reduce disparities in child outcomes from cradle to career through policy change.